The United States pays more money per capita for healthcare than any Western nation, and we have the worst outcomes. Why? The good news is that the combination of data and AI is changing all that, and in some surprising ways. Yes, doctors can achieve more accurate diagnostics, but healthcare providers can also communicate with patients better. Learn more on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, is here. And folks, we're going to talk about a pretty pressing subject area these days, something that accounts for about 20% of the GDP in the United States, healthcare. Should it be 20%? That's a lot. Are we getting that much value from healthcare that we're getting 20% of our whole GDP is going into this? Is that the value we're getting? Maybe not. We're going to talk about that today. We have Steve Sobel from Databricks and Anmol Medan from Radiant Graph, and they're doing some work together in the healthcare space. Of course, data and healthcare, pretty important stuff. And you need powerful engines to process this data because it's not just numbers of sales of widgets in a particular region. We're talking life sciences here. So you have the genome, you have pharmaceutical data, you have dietary data, all kinds of data that you have to really analyze and understand. Even blood work, you get your blood tests. Well, what's fun is that these days you can use ChatGPT to tell you what all that gobbledygook means. You can just grab it and punch it into ChatGPT, say, hey, what does this mean? And it'll tell you. So I think the learning curve is flattening a bit thanks to some of these technologies so we can learn more. But I can tell you that reading the blood values, that's a complicated science. And really, really good doctors know what to look for and what it might mean, what it could mean. Diagnostics, for example, understanding, and then things like population health, which require a tremendous amount of understanding and schemas and data and processing and analytics and all that fun stuff. And that's what we'll talk about today. So, Steve, I'll bring you in first from the Databricks side. Tell us a bit about what you're working on and what gets you excited.
Sure, Eric. Thanks for having me. I lead our early stage programs at Databricks and work with a lot of our startups. So Databricks, for the uninitiated who don't know us, I mean, we were founded in 2013. We were kind of best known as the original creators of Apache Spark. So we were kind of born out of a academic open source project, and we now have had the great fortune to scale to having over 10,000 customers globally across the world that are solving all manner of data problems with Databricks, whether it's companies like Disney or Warner Brothers Discovery that are driving better personalization for their end customers and making their end product stickier to their end customers. Customers like Shell that are using us to basically find where they should be, drilling their next, wells and kind of how do they, in a very expensive resource intense business, how do they get smarter about how they deploy their resources? And we'll hear from Anmol today, like, where companies like Radiant Graph, we're helping them drive better patient experiences by taking the data that they have and being able to apply AI and machine learning to it and doing it super fast. So as part of my remit leading all things startup for Databricks, we of course have like a startup program where we have a few hundred customers that will leverage free credits that we give away to get customers started on our platform. And specifically with our work with Anmol and in Radiant Graph, they were part of a competition that we ran this spring called the Built on Databricks Challenge, where we gave up to $1 million to the best application that was built on Databricks. And no surprise to us. I mean, we had, of course, like an extensive amount of interest, and we had some interesting applications from, fintech and developer tools, visualization tools. We kind of had a large remit of customers that were coming in and building interesting things on top of us. But what kind of, had Radiant Graph rise to the cream of the crop was, A, they were using our product in a super novel way, and B, like, as you point out, like, this is an incredibly complex problem, particularly in America, of, all of the complexity around patient data being some of the most, privacy compliant, the needs around this data being, is super heavy in terms of compliancy, privacy. And also just the modality of that data as well. Like a lot of that data lives in these very old school kind of legacy systems. So how do we kind of unlock a lot of that data so that we can, provide in Radiant Graph's case, like, make sure that, payers are providing and providers are providing better experiences for patients, that they know, the care that they can be accessible, that in many cases, healthcare is a business. Like, are you renewing this customer cohort? So couldn't be more excited about the work that we've been doing with Onmo, Radiant Graph, and the team.
That sounds great, Steve. And I'll bring you in now. You guys are working in some really interesting ways. And one thing I love is first party data. You want to talk about companies that have lots and lots and lots of first party data. It's healthcare companies, whether it's the providers or the payers. There's a ton of data out there. And we're just really at the very beginning of being able to understand and process vast amounts of unstructured data along with all the structured data. And for the benefit of our radio audience out there, structured data typically means data in a relational database. So a data warehouse, which you would use to understand profitability, how much money you're making from this widget or from that widget, this service or that service, being able to break it down by geographies. That's all well and good. Pretty easy stuff compared to crunching unstructured data. But now, thanks to the power of AI, of natural language processing, of course, the large language models we're talking about, this whole new ocean of possibilities has opened up. And it behooves organizations to leverage all of that. So, with that, Anmal, why don't you tell us a bit about Radiant Graph and what you folks are doing to help with the patient experience and get better outcomes?
Yeah, Eric, thank you for having me here. I'll maybe start with a little bit of my personal journey that brought me here, and that dovetails into Radiant Graph. Trained as a computer scientist. I got my PhD in machine learning from MIT a while back now, before it was cool, before AI was a buzzword, and started one of the earlier digital mental health companies, Ginger, that was acquired by Headspace, and then served as the chief data AI officer for a couple of public companies in the healthcare space. Livongo, which was the first IPO in digital health, and then followed by Teladoc, which at the time was the global leader in virtual care, telemedicine, mental health, chronic condition management, a variety of use cases. And so I've seen healthcare data in these roles over the last couple of decades. And before I even talk about data, it's worth talking about the problems that we're dealing with because of poor data and because of poor data management, right? So we start with, to your point, healthcare is 18% of our GDP and growing year on year, 7% on year. This year is the average estimated growth rate. While we spend the highest in the Western world on healthcare, we have the worst clinical outcomes.
Right.
Our access to care
Right.
is not great,
That's
right?
bad news.
That's bad news, right? And so what will it take? And at the root of a lot of this in healthcare is, to your point earlier, is if we can build a rich understanding of each one of us as consumers, and bring to healthcare what Steve and the Databricks team see every day. As Steve gave the example of Disney, but pick your favorite social media companies, banking companies, pick your favorite transportation business. All these businesses are really good at understanding us as consumers. And if you can bring that level of understanding into healthcare and live in a society where healthcare isn't one size fits all based on, some guideline that was maybe written 20, 30 years ago, but the systems are smart enough to say that the three of us are actually very different people, have different needs, have different levels of clinical support, and cater the care that we receive for our needs. I think that's where we drive efficiency in healthcare. That's a big opportunity here in healthcare, right? So Radiant Graph is based on my experience having seen this before in large companies. And healthcare companies are usually really good at care delivery. They're very passionate, motivated, driven people who care about the well-being of others in our society, but they're usually not very good at data, right? There's some exceptions, but for the most part, they're not very good at data, right? They're not technology businesses. They're really in the business of care delivery. And so platforms like Radiant Graph can go off and help bridge that gap. Radiant Graph works primarily with large national peers and regional peers, so your local Blues plan. We digest complex, messy, sparse healthcare data. We solve for a lot of the common issues. We then spin up models that personalize how we speak to each person in this group. So a person, say, in the diabetes population, Somebody might want to change their diet. Somebody else might want to exercise more. Somebody else might want to take on a GLP-1 supported therapy. There are different needs, different ways of managing their condition. Our systems learn all of that information, and then finally they connect that down so the health plan or the healthcare organization can engage members in their care. This could be closing gaps in care that exist. It could be helping members find the right benefits and the right programs that the healthcare organization or the plan already has available. It could be helping them connect with the resources they need to have happier, healthier lives. And so when we can do that, when we can use data as an asset, not only can we engage people in their care, but we can actually keep them healthier. We can do more preventative things. We can ultimately reduce the cost of healthcare in our
Yeah,
society. And that's
right.
what's exciting about what we're doing at Radiocraft.
Well, and we all have different metabolisms. We all have different diets, different lifestyles. Some people can live one lifestyle and be fine. Other people can live that lifestyle and have tremendous medical problems. So there are all sorts of dimensions to this, which is what makes it so complicated. But one of the things I like about this approach, and maybe I'll throw it over to Amal first and then over to Steve to comment on, is your focus on engagement and engaging with potential enrollees and plans because half the battle is just the communication that goes on between the individual, the patient or the potential patient, and the whole array of people involved in healthcare provision. And that's, of course, healthcare insurance companies, that's providers, it's payers, it's the whole gamut. And what I really like is that you focus on bringing all this data into a central place to have some ability to get a cohesive view of things, but also that engagement side, just staying in touch with people. One of my good friends works for UPMC, and she was telling me a while ago that they're trying to hit these targets of getting people in for their regular wellness visits, and they have no mechanism for knowing which one has not been there, which one has been there. This is a data problem. If they could run a report and find the people who have not gone their wellness, then run a campaign to reach out to them. That's how you do that kind of thing. This is fairly basic stuff, but you never know. A lot of times people just don't know how to do that. Epic, for example, as a system is incredibly complex, incredibly, I would say, bloated in many senses. So what I'm kind of teeing you up to talk about real quick, Amal, here is how your information first strategy around collecting data and then focusing on engagement is a huge part of your success story, right?
That's exactly right, Eric. And I've had this, someone told me this in the early days of starting Radiocraft, which is if you look at healthcare being a $4.7 trillion cost in our society in the US and North America today, solving for engagement is $1 trillion opportunity. And what I mean by that is if we can just get people to do the right thing,
Right.
just do the preventative visits, drive behavior change, manage their lifestyle, manage their chronic conditions. And that's where we're going to see tremendous economic impact and clinical impact on their lives and their families, right? So that's just getting people to do the right thing is really, really hard. And if you
Right.
think about it, I mean, it's sort of intuitive, right? And all of us are different people. There are different ways to engage. I'll give you a really simple example, right? Getting people to change their diet and exercise more, right? There's so much cultural context here, right? I'm of Indian origin, I'm South Asian. I grew up, if you've had Indian food, I mean, it's one of the richest cuisines, right, in our society. And it made a lot of sense when all of us worked on farms and, had to toil 18 hours, 14 hours a day in the sun, right? I sit in front of a desk all day long, right? But that's my cultural context, right? That's the context I grew up in, right? Or maybe for somebody else, it's chicken and waffles, or maybe for somebody else, it's tacos, right? We have our cultural context. And so how do you unwind decades of social construct to get a person to do something differently? We all know there's a way to do it. We all know we should be eating healthier. It's just hard to get people to do stuff, right? You think of the chronic condition burden in our society and healthcare, a meaningful part, I'd say majority of healthcare spend in our society is tied to chronic conditions, things like diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular, back pain. A lot of that comes down to lifestyle changes, weight management, having healthier habits, right? So getting people to do this stuff is really hard. And so if you can use data to first understand each person uniquely, understand how to support them, what their needs are, where they are in their healthcare journey, and then combine that with what we can do today with agents and AI systems, where imagine if each one of us had a phone conversation or an agentic interaction that was designed for us. that was helping us deprogram those cultural behaviors that we've carried since childhood that make us work a certain way, the things that we've learned, the way we manage our stress, maybe poorly in my case, right? If you could have agents walk us through that journey, imagine how incredibly amazing healthcare could be in our society, right? That's
Hmm.
the world I want to live in. That's the parallel universe that I would like to be in as I think of not just what we can do with data and understanding claims and understanding pharmacy and understanding social determinants of health. The way we take this, imagine how we create a unique experience for each one of us as healthcare consumers. That's the exciting opportunity here. But in order to unlock that, it starts with the data. It starts with understanding your individuals and pointing those AI systems, pointing these agentic approaches to the right approach, to the right need, the right way to communicate with each member. Those are the use cases that Radiant Graph is solving. And what
Yeah.
we're able to do with large healthcare is instead of having them build all the stuff in-house, with their IT teams or technology teams, which are often, really great people, but often under-supported, underfunded, right, on dealing with multi-year roadmaps, is we're able to bring in a platform that slots in their infrastructure, works with Databricks, works with the existing data infrastructure, learns these patterns, and lets them deploy AI-based engagement in a matter of weeks, understanding their data, meeting the healthcare requirements, SOC 2 Type 2, high trust, the other compliance requirements that healthcare has, the safety, the guardrails that need to exist, and put this data to work so they can actually support their members. To your example, our UPMC, understand which members need help, write the campaigns, engage them in their
Right.
care, close the gaps in care, get the preventative screenings done so the person actually does the right thing. So I think a lot of healthcare is about just getting people to do the right thing and it's hard. We're humans. It's hard, right? We're not dealing with machines. We're dealing with a lot of human context here. And that's where I think AI can be and data can be a differentiator.
Yeah, so this is such a really, really good point, and I'm an information systems guy, so I talk about this stuff every week. DM Radio is in its 18th year. We've been doing this a long, long, long time. And when I think about several of the points that you just made, I'm realizing there are so many touch points where useful information can be shared, but historically, you couldn't do the personalization. And because when it's not personalized, it gets a lot less attention. So when you just get a generic email that goes to everyone and said, "Hey, get your blood pressure checked," for example, okay, who's going to do that? Not many people are going to do that. But the more personalized the message becomes, the more relevant it is, the more likely it will be read and ingested and appreciated. And this is the power of personalization with AI and information systems these days in the healthcare world, which is a tremendous opportunity. I mean, I would just venture to say that if we can make this a behavior, if we can make this a habit for organizations to leverage data in this way, to engage with their patients, to have meaningful conversations where the doctor really understands and is talking to the person, not to a computer screen, which is kind of what we've seen with some of the stuff lately, and it's kind of a hurdle we have to get over, that will have a remarkable impact on improving healthcare. Because when people are engaged, they make better decisions. When you know better, you do better, basically. And right now, there's a whole lot of static, a lot of noise. Talking about AI plus data equals a revolution in healthcare. And so much of this stuff boils down to simple communication, engagement, empathy. Yes, empathy matters in the world of healthcare. They call that bedside manner, and bedside manner means a lot. You like the more someone connects with you, the more they're going to listen to what you have to say, and so that's a very personal thing. We can now capture some of that in the communications that we have with people if we have the right data, if we have the right systems, if we have the right architecture. And that's a big deal these days. Architecture is is kind of turned sideways now to a certain extent because of large language models, because of RAG models we see, retrieval augmented generation, which are designed to ground these LLMs because these LLMs are very vast and unwieldy and they know all kind of stuff that's not very specialized. But when you can marry that kind of functionality with your corporate trusted data, personal data about patients, for example, all of a sudden you can get much better answers and ask much better questions. And a big part of that is the information architecture itself. So, with that, Steve, I'll hand it over to you. I know that at Databricks, and I've been tracking Databricks since came out of the startup phase a long, long time ago. And I've been very impressed with the architectural vision and the assiduous nature with which the Databricks team is building out this stack, this technology stack. But tell us your perspective, why architecture really matters.
Yeah, I'll start by saying, of course, it's like not the most sexy topic in the world, and
At least for our audience.
I come not being an architect. I come mostly from like a business context, so it's somewhat ironic. My commentary here is going to be about architecture, but it matters tremendously. Like if you look at, frankly, if you look at it, and part of my talk track here is informed. I used to run our go-to-market for Martech Communications and Media, so I've spent a lot of time, in particular, talking to customers in the customer data platform CDP space. CDPs, customer data platforms, they're, or for those of you uninitiated, like they're MarTech tooling to basically help you take everything you know about your audience and basically be able to segment that audience and then be able to take what you know about that audience and push it into your activation channels. The way that CDPs have been set up, though, have been set up so essentially you're making a copy of your data and you're just making it available to your marketers. That copy of data sometimes is missing streaming data, sometimes it's missing your transactional data. It's an incomplete copy of your data, so that by the time you're actually trying to use CDP capability, I think there's an organization called the CDP Institute. They did a survey a couple of years ago. I think it was something like 90% of respondents who had bought a CDP in the last year were dissatisfied with their purchase. Not because the technology was bad, but frankly because these tools weren't working because they were not architected. They were architected in isolation of the wider data platform, where generally there's going to be more, better, fresher data that is coming through those pipelines. So we've seen this approach over the last few years, and it's only really accelerated, of this concept of composable architecture. How do I think about Databricks as a kind of core data platform feeding in, data from lots of different sources, whether that's ad tech, martech sources in the case of Radiant Graph, bringing in that ad tech data or the ad tech, martech data, but also like that patient data so that you can deliver better personalization at scale. But the approach that Radiant Graph is taking and the approach that we're seeing others in this market take is like, don't basically bring data to the infra layer. Don't bring data and have it like, don't have the app layer be the be all end all of everything that you're doing. The infra layer is probably the best place to take all of your data, clean that data, make sure that data is ready to be activated over time. So I think success for organizations like Radiant Graph are really, I think, enabled by the fact that they're leaning into this concept of composable architecture. They're leaning into kind of this hub and spoke model where, you're kind of centralizing, feeding all of your data into one place, getting it into, let's call it, we have this kind of medallion architecture paradigm of moving data from, bronze, silver to gold being, BI ready, business ready kind of aggregate data. And in that kind of data prep and making sure that that data is ready is really, I think, like the important thing that we're seeing in the ability to handle complex problems like Radiant Graph is solving. Like Eric, you mentioned earlier, it's not like, the world of, everyone kind of getting mass marketing emails and being expected to engage around those, like that's done. Like we live in a world where like it's, now more than ever with the advent of LLMs, it's like right time, right place, right message type marketing is that much more important to capture mind share with your end consumer. And that only works if you're taking all of the data, being able to apply AI to it and being able to do it super fast in real time. And that's really what we're seeing, kind of the paradigm that our customers are kind of building with us around, whether it's composable architecture for, engagement, whether it's composable architecture for security, whether it's composable architecture for observability. Regardless of what the use case is, we are seeing more of an approach as organizations are looking to mitigate like the complexity of their architecture, mitigate their cost, and have a more streamlined architecture that, we kind of see and hear either, warehouse or lakehouse native applications rather than, applications that are kind of in isolation of the rest of the infrastructure layer.
Yeah, well, architecture matters for a lot of different reasons. And, I heard at the Databricks Summit a couple months ago or 8 weeks ago, whenever it was, Ali Ghazi talking about pay as you go, like pay for what you use, pay for the compute more than anything, as opposed to paying for everything and then maybe getting some value. No, you want to get down to the granular workflows that really matter, use the data that really matters in this particular use case, and do so efficiently. And when you do that, you save tremendous amounts of money. I mean, like I joked that this show's in its 18th year. I remember 17 years ago talking about ETL processes and batch windows and thinking to myself, this is crazy. I mean, you're moving the same data around and around and around again every single day. You're only using maybe 5 to 10% of that data. Like, that doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. But you have to realize that technologies evolve kind of like languages evolved, and language is an imperfect science. Language can be misinterpreted and misunderstood and misjudged, for example, miswritten. Now LLMs are probably doing a better job at writing than most people can do on their own. So it's like, wow, we're in a very strange place. But my point I'm driving at here is that efficiency really matters. And it matters because when you can do things in a cost effective fashion, you're going to be interested in doing things. If just trying something is too expensive, you're not even going to try it. So, the opportunity cost is very significant if you don't take an efficient approach. But when you do start thinking efficiently, one, you get down to what really matters, you focus on what really matters. And two, you start to see the value. And that's when people get excited about analytics, about data, is when they're getting the value, the understanding that helps them improve outcomes, improve performance of plans for healthcare insurance, improve performance of doctors, because doctors want to do the right thing. Everybody wants to do the right thing, or almost everyone does. We just want to make sure that the infrastructure they use to do that is highly efficient, right, Anmol? What do you think?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I didn't realize Steve was going to talk about CDPs, but I have a funny story on CDPs here, which is, the number of conversations I've had. We're a young company. We're a couple of years old, if even, and the number of conversations I've had with executives, marketing leaders, even inside large healthcare health plans, where they've tried to put in some of the data they thought was going to be relevant into a CDP, and then have had to kind of unwind that in various levels of various degrees is just kind of really surprising. And I think when it comes to healthcare engagement, I think part of the insight, I think the reason behind that is I think we have a very narrow-minded view of what constitutes healthcare data. And like, oh, it's just claims, or it's just pharmacy claims, for example, right? Or maybe it's notes from the EMR if there's a system use case. I actually think there's the richness of what Radiantcraft is doing is, yes, those data matter, but also there's a lot more happening in the person's life in this day and age, which also matters. If a person's got a Fitbit, an Oura Ring, or whatever, and they want to bring that biometric data in, then the system should be able to use that. If the person's gone through onboarding in their mobile app and of the healthcare organization and said, I actually am really interested in so and so program and I need help with X, Y, and Z, which most people have kind of entered some information along the journey, the system should be able to use that, leverage that, and point to that. If there is additional biometric data, if there's things that are, often social determinants play a huge role in healthcare. And so the light systems, and this is where I think the CDP model hasn't quite worked in healthcare, at least from our conversations, is because the idea that only a subset is going to exist in a CDP and the rest of it is going to be elsewhere in the Databricks or other cloud solution, I think just doesn't scale, right? So I think you
Mm.
kind of need it all in a place we end up having just multiple integrations, which is just in one with the source system in the first place. And so I think that's kind of an interesting point, Steve, that you made that I've seen in real life. To your point about efficiency, there's a second order efficiency here, which is something we're seeing on the front lines. Um, a lot of what healthcare does when it comes to digesting the data, acting on it, and communicating with it are manual processes today. And inside large healthcare organizations, there are dozens, sometimes hundreds of people who are matching claims, processing these things, helping plug that into the lifecycle marketing campaigns or the product experiences and so on. And one of the huge opportunities with Radiantcraft and our platform is I believe that 80% of the manual work should go away and machines should be doing this job. And
Right.
what that means for leaders and executives and for all of us as taxpayers who pay for Medicare, Medicaid, other forms of healthcare indirectly, is that we can use those people, those resources, those skills in other areas where the human touch is really important, where we can have people play a more active role in engaging with members, engaging with consumers, and with
Right.
patients in healthcare experiences and delivery versus having them do a lot of the, I'll call it the back office data processing type of tasks, which are in many parts of healthcare still actually quite manual. Like a shocking amount of healthcare stuff is still quite manual.